Hey up YouTube, today we're taking a look at the UK65, and as the name suggests, it's a 65mm across brushless tiny whoop. It's got an F3 flight controller and minuscule 0603 1900 kV motors, and they spin 31mm tri-blades. The package comes with 3 250mAh HV lipos and a 6-port charger. It's also available in FreeSky and FlySky variants. It doesn't stop there though, this is pretty well loaded. We have an onboard current sensor, Betaflight OSD to change PIDS and with a voltage readout. It's telemetry capable, smart audio ready which is already connected up to TX3, and Betaflight 3.4 so you get all the new flight training modes and of course turtle mode. So you don't even have to get up and do the walk of shame when you crash. The 4-in-1 ESC is Dshot 600 and has specific settings to get the best out of these motors. It's also worth adding that all of this is on one two-sided PCB that's only 30 by 30mm. And keeping up with the Whoop theme, it's using an all-in-one 25mW 700 TVL 120 degree camera. This is wristband compliant, NTSC not switchable, and draws around 300mA, so plenty of overhead on the 0.8 amp BEC. Now these motors I have used once before on the Dshot ESC and had a hard time with the vibrations. The problem here is they are just too small to fit bearings, so in the place are brass bushings. The set on the Dshot had a lot of wobble and slop. I'm happy to say the UK65 motors are far smoother than those I received on the Dshot, and both sound and feel slop free apart from a little vertical play. There's still a few vibrations you can see in the form of very slight jello, but I think this is down to the props more than the motors, also the same as the Dshot 58. The other place it differs slightly is the Dshot came with a 450mA lipo, so I was fairly surprised to see only 250mAh lipos bundled with this package, although it is very nice to see the use of high voltage. Lipo warnings kick off pretty much as soon as you take off, and the 4.3 volts immediately drops to about 3.4 under load, and promptly drops below 3 within a minute or so, showing they are just too small, which is confirmed with the paltry 2 to 2.5 minutes flight. Betaflight lipo warnings can of course be adjusted, but I question the logic behind flying a lipo down to 3 volts and below under load, even if it popped back up to 3.3, 3.4 when landed. Failsafe does work fine on my T12 when it's set to no pulses, but if you fly the lipo down enough it will just reboot the flight controller and ESC. With those issues aside, it does fly very well and feels the closest to a 1S brush setup as I have flown yet. It's generally about half the weight of a brushed 1S setup, but it's using much smaller props, but it does have about the same power to weight ratio and about half the flight time. The all-in-one cam and VTX is a solid performer, and even with the dipole I had next to no static and break up flying the entirety of my house, behind the metal railings in the park and even behind the trees. I'd hazard a guess that it's pushing out a little bit more than 25mW, but zero complaints here from the video performance. It will handle a light breeze quite well, but as you can see here on gusty days it does get its butt kicked a bit. Here the wind picked up and pushed me to the left as it catches the ducks, and then as I turn around to the right it blows me again. Just expect to have to compensate a little bit on the bits in between, more than something like the QX95 due to the ducks and being half the weight. This is pretty much full speed downwind and back upwind in self-level mode. I tried a few different lipos, which is what you're seeing here, to see if I could break the 3-minute flight time. First up was a 300mAh nanotech, which still dropped to 3.4, 3.5 volts fairly quickly under load, but dropped much slower after that, giving around 3 minutes flight time. When it did power cycle due to being too low, it still had enough power to get back rather than just keep power cycling on the stock lipo. Next up is a 450mAh HV lipo from the QX65S. This felt much heavier in flight and the hover bite point was higher, but power on reserve was much more respectable. There seemed to be slightly more vibrations with a little bit more weight on the battery, but it also felt more precise picking out lines in the light wind outside. I did try briefly with some larger 600mAh lipos, which the Dshot ESC flew okay with, but there's very minimal climb out or recovery power, plus flights were still below the 2-minute mark, so it does feel like 300 to 450mAh is a sensible limit here. There's a couple of things left to mention, but first here's some tunes and some speed runs out of that 450.
I know how it feel to wake up fucked up, pockets broke as hell, another rock to sell. People look at you like you's the user, selling drugs to all the losers, mad Buddha abuser. But they don't know about your stress-filled day, baby on the way, mad bills to pay. That's why you drink Tanqueray, so you can reminisce and wish you wasn't living so devilish. Shit, I remember I was just like you, smoking blunts with my crew, flipping over 62s, cause GED wasn't B.I.G. I had to get PAD, that's why my moms hate me. She was forced to kick me out, no doubt. Then I figured out Nicks went for 20s down south. Packed up my tools for my raw power move. Glock 19 for casket and flower moves. For Trump's trying to stop my flow. And what they don't know will show on the autopsy. Went to see Poppy to cop me a brick. Asked for some consignment, he wasn't trying to hear it. Smoking mad Newports cause I'm doing court for an assault that I caught in Bridgeport, New York. Catch me if you can like the gingerbread man. You better have your cat in hand cause man to be B-I-G. The rock the cell. No doubt B-I-G. The rock the cell. To be B-I-G. The rock the cell. No doubt B-I-G. I had the master plan, I'm in the caravan on my way to Maryland with my man 2-Tex to take over this project. They call him 2-Tex, he told 2-Tex. And when he start the bus, he like to ask who's next. I got my honey on the Amtrak with the crack in the crack of her ass. 2 pounds of hash in the stash. I wait for her to make some quick cash. I told her she could be lieutenant, bitch got gas. At last, I'm literally lounging black, sitting back counting double-digit thousand stacks. Had to re-up, see what's up with my peeps. Toyota dealer thought had it cheap on the Jeep. See who got smoked, what rumors was spread. Last I heard I was dead, with sticks to the head. Then I got the phone call, it couldn't hit me harder. We got infiltrated, like Nino at the Carter. Heard Tech got murdered in a town I never heard of by some bitch named Alberta over nickel-plated burners. And my bitch, swear to God she won't snitch. I told her when she hit the bricks I make the hooker rich. Conspiracy, she'll be home in 3. Until then I looks out for the whole family. A true G, that's me blowing like a bubble in the everyday struggle. To be B-I-G, the rock the cell. No doubt B-I-G, the rock the cell. To be B-I-G, the rock the cell. No doubt B-I-G.
So those other things I wanted to mention. This is the bind button. It's easy to think it's fallen off, it's so small, but it is there, it does work. Just don't expect to use the end of a finger like you normally would, it's more of the edge of a nail job. Now when I first tried to spin the motors, one of them just twitched. I thought it was a dodgy ESC motor, but it turned out just to be the wires coming out of the motor that were touching the bell. I added a little bit of cotton thread and some CA just to hold them in place. That little screw at the back is for the camera tilt. Backed out it's just a couple of degrees, and then fully screwed down there's about 10 degrees tilt, which is plenty for this at full speed. I think the charger is a wonderful idea, and it gives you a USB port and 6 separate channels that can be individually switched from standard 4.2 volts to high voltage 4.35. It also gives you a 200 mAh or 600 mAh charge rate. The final voltages on each channel did vary though, it was 4.3 to 4.38 for the 4.35 volt batteries, so it's not quite perfect. I tested it with 3S, 4S and 6S and all with the same output voltages. When you power it on, it shows you the XT60 input voltage, then the USB voltage, and then cycles through each channel one by one. I don't think you're going to manage to chain fly if you've just got 3 batteries, but if you had 6 then you could pretty much just fly constantly. And the stock batteries fit fairly well into the frame, but do move off perfect CG in bumps and crashes, and sometimes even used in turtle mode. I used an elastic band to fit larger lipos, as this doubled up as a nice anti-slip method of holding the stock lipos solid in crashes too. The frame's taken a little bump and grind really well, and the only damage happened with several drops on concrete from about 6 foot. Even then it was just a side support and a little CA and thread patched that up great. The other thing I really like is it's really easy to work on. If the frame does need changing, it's a 5-minute job with no soldering whatsoever. Perfect for the new pilot. I hope that answers any questions or concerns you had about the UK65. If not, drop them down below and I'll do my best to answer them. That's all for this one. See you in the next.
Rock the sound, no doubt, PIDS.